Hi people, so this is a political video, which means it's going to probably be a bit longer for the reasons I laid out before. I don't think you can cover something like this in a 5 minute video, so feel free to multitask. Do the dishes, that's one I often do when I'm watching other videos. Yeah, because it's going to be a bit longer by necessity, just the things I have to cover. I want to talk about Labour and Keir Starmer. Starmer's been leader for just over 2 years now. I think it was April 2020 he became leader. And let's just start with the basic truth. Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition is one of the toughest jobs in politics. Why? Because it's such a balancing act. You know, you need to show that you are heading a party that could be a party of government, yet, by the whole nature of opposition, your job is to hold the government to account, the government of the day. Yet hold them to account in such a way that it doesn't just look like opportunism and criticizing for the sake of it. In other words, you need to hold them to account on issues. I think on issues like Partygate. I think on issues that there's real public anger about, rising living costs, things like that, but not just opportunistic sniping. Um, it's been said before that I can't remember if it was on the Cameron and Miliband period where they said PMQs wouldn't be punch and judy politics. Well, that's kind of went down the drain because it still is. But to be honest, maybe it should be because maybe it's good for democracy to be robust like that and to see clear differences. Um, but I think it could be done in perhaps a more respectful way for parliamentarians to act like parliamentarians. I mean, honestly, sometimes the way MPs behave, um, they're like a bunch of football louts rather than elected members of parliament. It can be quite raucous. Um, I if I was to give Starmer a point out of 10 for his leadership so far, I'd probably give him five. I'm not going higher because I do have some significant concerns about his leadership. But I want to challenge the Labour left's attitude to Starmer, or hard left, I probably should say, because I feel there's plenty of centre left people who would support him. Over and over and over again, you see them say, "Oh, Starmer's a Tory, a closet Tory." But then they will say this about anybody, any Labour figure who is not a full-blown red flag carrying, um, Castro worshipping socialist. Um, and I don't think it's even about socialism. I think you could be a responsible socialist. But it's a very parochial attitude they seem to have. And to me, it's like they can't think beyond their bubble. So it goes something like this. Well, the big criticism right now is about the strikes that are ongoing. Their attitude is Starmer should get behind it 100% and fully 100% support the strikers. But here's the thing. Keir Starmer could easily do that and it would please the left. He'd become the darling of the hard left if he'd done that. But it is important for him to strike a balance. If he fully supports these strikes, it would be easy for the Tories to say, "Oh well, he's just he's just a protest leader. He's not heading a party that is responsible for government." Why? Because these strikes are also inconveniencing a lot of ordinary people, and the RMT knows that. Um, Notwithstanding Mr. Lynch's disgraceful comments recently blaming the EU for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which shows, where the hard left are in terms of world affairs. Leaving that aside, it would be easy for Starmer to do that and, he'd become popular with the hard left. But that's not the responsible thing to do. A leader has to get a balance. Now, the big argument there is, well, the Labour Party was founded on trade unionism. I saw one guy say in the comments section there was a call into LBC and it was one of the comments who said, "My grandfather worked down the pits. He would spit on the ground if he saw Starmer today, and things like this. So it's this kind of, dare I say, dewy-eyed idealism that Labour hard left has. Now, this is not to disrespect those Labour roots, and I want to be careful about that. Because, miners, shipbuilders, these, textile workers, these were the men and women who built Britain. And we should never forget that. One thing I liked about the Birmingham Commonwealth Games opening ceremony was that segment they had on the women pulling the chains. We should never ever forget the toil and the dangers and the hardship that previous generations suffered building this country. Um, and the Labour Party, it's its foundations. So absolutely that should always be respected. But this is 2022, not 1922, not 1892. Um, the world has moved on. Things have changed. We no longer have those sort of industries, rightly or wrongly. We just don't. So a Labour leader has to work with the time that he or she is in. Um, and this idea that Starmer should be getting behind the picket lines, and it's just not realistic, because then the public would say, well, is he really on our side? Now, it's fine for the Green Party to do that. The Green Party, in my opinion, is just a protest party. They don't care because they know they're not going to be in government. But the Labour Party has a chance of government, has been a party of government 6 times. Um, not as dominant as the Tories, but it's proven that it can govern. So I just don't understand their mentality. I'm not necessarily talking about their politics. I'm talking about their lack of pragmatism. The fact that they can't seem to see beyond this bubble. Because people like me, who is not currently aligned to any party, I'm watching both parties, big parties, very, very closely. And honestly, right now, honestly, I don't know who to vote for. And this is not because I'm apathetic. It's quite the opposite. It's precisely because I care so much. Um, so the Labour left annoy me with this attitude. Like, he's not real Labour. Time and time and time again, any Labour figure who is not basically a Corbynite, and we could say that Corbyn's yesterday's man, but the truth is he still has a big influence in Labour ranks. Now, some have called for Starmer to be ruthless and get rid of that hard left completely. I don't know, it might backfire. I'm not sure if that's the right approach. I do think, though, as leader, he would be within his rights to take some disciplinary action if they were constantly trying to undermine his leadership. Whatever the mechanisms are within the Labour Party, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely versed in that, but Kinnock done it with the militant faction in the 80s, and I believe he was right to do so. Neil Kinnock, I always think, is an interesting figure. He's kind of dismissed as, in rather unkind terms, as the Welsh windbag and so on, but I actually think Kinnock was quite an interesting figure. He was almost a transitionary figure between old and new Labour. John Smith, another very interesting figure. Well, there you go. John Smith, there's a man who could very well have become Prime Minister. And he certainly wasn't, he dare I say, as right as Blair. He wasn't. He was quite a solid left wing figure, but he was a practical man. Um, he knew that he could well have become Prime Minister. Sadly, circumstances took a different turn. But every Labour Prime Minister has had to pitch to the centre in some way, or they've had to be practical in some way. Now, Clement Attlee and Harold Wilson were certainly well to the left of Tony Blair, but even they knew they couldn't just be heading protest parties. Clement Attlee had served with Churchill in that wartime government. He had shown to the British people he could be a reconciliatory figure. And actually, one reason he won the 45 election was the Tories and Churchill underestimated the desire for change. So Attlee may not have been the most thrilling politician around. He was probably quite dull, but he's rightly seen as one of the 20th century towering figures in British politics because he was such a transforming figure. But he was practical enough to know um, how to utilize those changing times without just being seen as a protest party. And this is kind of, one gets the impression that Starmer could have opportunities, something akin to either, I would say, Attlee or Wilson. Why? Because we've just went through some really dramatic global events, namely the pandemic. That's an unparalleled event in modern times. Um, this war in Ukraine is a major, major thing. I mean, it's the most serious situation in Europe since World War II, even surpassing the crisis in the Balkans in the 1990s. So I think that there are big world events going on that Starmer, I don't want to say use, that sounds very cynical, but this is a time of opportunism um, to prove his mettle as leader. There are things I don't like about Starmer. I do not like the fact that he has went out of his way to pander to the woke left. I mean, that ridiculous time he took the knee for Black Lives Matter and other such things. It just looks ridiculous. I don't think that's leadership. I think that's virtue signaling. In those cases, I think it is. Um, by all means, he can express sympathy to Black Lives Matter and to Me Too and all the rest of it. But I feel that was virtue signaling. Also, the fact that Keir Starmer could not say clearly what a woman is frankly pathetic. It's pathetic. Um, in those areas, I think the Tories are a lot stronger. The left say the Tories wage the culture wars. I think the left wage the culture wars a lot more. All those Tory leadership candidates were doing was saying a woman is a woman, and for that, they're dangerous transphobes. It's ridiculous. Um, so actually, Labour could be looking at Tories such as Kimi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat, who actually galvanised support outside the party. Of course, they never got the leadership. And time will tell if the Tories have made a big mistake by going for one of those two establishment figures. Because let's face it, Truss and Sunak were both closely tied to Johnson. Um, but the other thing about Starmer, sometimes he's too much like a lawyer, and I don't particularly trust Labour when it comes to crime and justice. It's not that the Tories have been great. I honestly think the entire legal establishment needs a radical overhaul. The Tories should do it, and this is my big issue with the Tories. They should be the party of law and order, but they've done too little. Dominic Raab's been okay. He's been one of the better Justice Secretaries. He introduced the Victims Bill. Um, and this move, the televised judicial verdict, that's a good move. It gives more transparency. But the Sentencing Council and the Parole Board are unelected. In my opinion, they're massively out of touch. Sentencing remains too soft. The country was shocked by that horrible murder of the elderly gentleman in London the other day, in a wheelchair, savage, evil, callous. Um, so when people see that sort of stuff, they want a party that recognizes public anger and recognizes the need to hold these sort of criminals to account. Um, that Blairite mantra, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. The principle's a good one. New Labour didn't do enough to deliver, but the principle at least was the right one. Um, so what am I driving at here? Am I saying that Keir Starmer should just be another Tony Blair because Blair won three general elections? And this is the irony, of course. I'm not saying that, by the way, but this is the irony. Tony Blair is kind of a hit figure. I mean, across the board, he's a controversial figure. Whenever Blair is voicing his opinion on any issue, even if he happened to be right, there's this knee-jerk reaction. Oh, Blair, war criminal. He should stick his nose out of politics or retire. He should, he's like Thatcher. In many quarters, he's a figure of hate. Um, but in my opinion, Tony Blair was a great prime minister and a great statesman who made some very major mistakes, most notably Iraq. But I still think Tony Blair had some significant accomplishments. Um, and one day history might be kinder, maybe. But the irony about this is Tony Blair. and his party won 3 general elections. That's a fact. Teflon Tony. People could say what they want, but that's the reality. Um, Harold Wilson, if my history is correct, won 2 general elections. Is that right? 64 and 76. Yeah, 2 general elections. So, um, no, no, 64 and 74. Yeah. So, I think that the Labour left really need to ask, what do they want? Do they want to be in perpetual opposition? I mean, if they think that Starmer's a closet Tory and they think he isn't going far enough, would they really prefer the Tories stay in power? Because the way things are going, if they continue sniping at their leader, I think the worst thing Labour could do, only 15 minutes, I thought it would be longer. The worst thing they could do is get rid of Starmer at this point. Because if they get rid of Starmer now, okay, maybe Angela Rayner could be a good leader. I don't know, but I just think it would be a mistake just 2 years before a general election. I suppose it is 2 years, but here's the thing: I feel that it's looking increasingly likely that 2024 will be another 1992. In other words, a lot of people are tired of the Tories, and there's this perception we need a change, but it's not quite there. It's not quite there because Labour is very divided, despite the fact that, here's the thing, I mean, Labour under Starmer has been winning by elections. And in terms of consistent polls show Labour is actually doing quite well. So why on earth would you want to change your leader in this situation? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. I suppose we have to see how strong Sunak or Truss will be. Increasingly likely it's going to be Truss. If she completely messes up, that will give Starmer an own goal. I'll tell you one thing, and this might be by the by. I hope it doesn't become. I think Truss would be foolish, and so would the Tories, if they tried to say, "Oh, she's a woman and Starmer's bullying her," or take that sort of line, because both parties have tried that, and I have no respect for it. As far as I'm concerned, women politicians, um, equality means equality. That doesn't mean special treatment. So, if people start saying, "Oh, Starmer's bullying her because she's a woman," spare me. Really, that would be ridiculous. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it might, and both sides do it. Both sides do it. True equality is treating women equally, which means no special treatment. But anyway, that's another thing I dislike about Labour. Labour feminists are completely. I mean, many of them are the worst kind of feminists, just very intolerant to different points of view, and yeah. Although having said that, there is this feminist kind of infighting now with trans activists, and Labour definitely has struggled with that one. And it's one area to support the feminists on. But anyway, I derail. I derail. Um, Here's the thing: if you are on the Labour left, I get it. Starmer might not be ideal, but to say he's a Tory, what do you think that's doing? All that's doing is weakening his leadership. All that's doing is prolonging the time Labour's going to be in opposition. Because then, if you keep saying that, you're going to undermine him in the public eye, and a lot of floating voters will go for the Tories. So I think 2024, it might be another 1992 where there's a lot of people who are kind of shy to vote Tory, but they will anyway. I mean, 92, people forget this. John Major actually got the largest popular vote, unless I'm mistaken, ever. It was even a bigger popular vote than Tony Blair got in 1997. And yet there wasn't a great enthusiasm because it was just, well, it's a continuation. Um, so Starmer has a very hard job. He is trying to unify a very large party. It's the largest political party in Europe, as I understand it, by numbers of membership. He is trying to unify all these factions, and he'll never be able to do that. I don't know if any leader can. John Smith possibly could. Um, but it's not. I don't. I honestly don't think Starmer is going to be Blair Mark II, and I don't think he should be. But I think if he was a sort of centre left figure who could show that he could govern, how would I vote for Labour? What would bring me to vote for Labour? And I'll probably repeat myself here from the previous video. If they could show that they're tough on crime, that's a very important one to me. I know I keep beating the drum on that, but it's a very important one to me. Not just say it, prove it. Um, if they could get control of these rising living costs. I mean, this policy that Starmer just announced, that's a big thing. His plan to immediately halt rising energy costs, that's a big thing. That's the sort of thing Labour should be doing. Now, why is Starmer not getting credit for that? It makes no sense. Surely the hard left would favour that. A Labour Party that stands up to big corporations, yes, but without just being doing it for protest's sake, doing it because it's right. It's right, for example, that these greedy energy companies are challenged. Why is it their CEOs are getting huge bonuses? A woman from Thames Water yesterday was interviewed in LBC, totally dismissive and arrogant attitude. Her whole thing was, oh, well, it's the biggest company, so of course we're going to have more problems. And I thought she did not come across well at all. Um, so if Labour can do that, yes, take those Labour positions, stand up for workers' rights, stand up to the corporations and their greed, but also show that they're a party of government. I'm not concerned about foreign policy because I actually think Starmer has been quite practical, statesmanlike on that. He supported Ukraine, he supported the government where need be. He has taken a hawkish line on Russia and China. That's good. That's good, and that's what I want to see in a leader. Corbyn, absolute disgrace. He went on an Arab channel to criticize the West for funding Ukraine instead of condemning the Russian aggressors. Jeremy Corbyn, if he had his way, would actually have the Ukrainians give over their entire sovereignty to the Russian invaders. Corbyn's a damn disgrace. And thank goodness that man never got into power. But this is the problem. The Corbynites still have a lot of influence on Labour. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But that's how I see it. That's how I see Labour's internal problem. Namely, that the hard left cannot think beyond the bubble. Starmer's going to win in 2024. He has to show the Labour will be a party for everyone, or as broad reaching as possible. And he cannot do that if he just panders to the hard left. He can't. And that's what they have to understand. It may work in terms of internal popularity, but true leaders look at real politics. They look at pragmatism. If Starmer would just, you know, distance himself from this nonsense woke politics, and also if he'd be a bit less politically correct when it comes to issues like Islamist extremism, it took him 24 hours to condemn the attack on Salman Rushdie. That's disgraceful. I want to see the Labour Party not afraid to tackle issues like that, because after all, Islamism is a neo-conservative, it's an ultra-conservative, I should say, movement. Labour should be the antithesis of Labour, especially with their track record on women's rights and so on, and gay rights. They should be vocally opposing Islamist extremism. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. But I really feel that's what Labour has to do. And these people who constantly say Starmer's a Tory, all they're doing is scoring an own goal, in my opinion.